Welcome to the All That Jazz podcast. I'm your host, Matyash, and I have with me Gina Mazza today. And she's a journalist, she's a book coach, editor, publishing consultant, says muse on her Facebook as well, and I cannot read this, intuitionist, wow,
Tuitionist.
intuitionist, wow.
I like
Welcome
to
to the
make
show.
up words. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And as you can see, I like to make up words.
Yeah, I've never heard that word before. Is it like a word that's not often used, or is it a word that you made up?
I think it's actually a real word that's not used that often, but it just basically
Okay.
means person who uses their intuition with everything that they do. It kind of funnels through everything that they do in life, and
Right, right,
that's
right.
how I think about myself and my work.
So is intuition, like a lot of people that I talk to, intuition is something like early on in their life, intuition, and now you being an intuitionist, I'll get this right eventually. So that early on in life, you start to get the sense that you could pick up on things in your environment because you just had the sixth sense.
I think that we all have it. And I think that when we're children, just like you described, it's a very natural thing to tap into our gut instincts about things. I think it's only when we get older and we kind of put a judgment on that ability that we start to doubt it or question it. But I think it's a sense just like hearing and seeing and taste and smell. It's something we're born with.
Right, but I got the sense that some people that I know that particularly females, that they're more born with a stronger intuition than males. Have you noticed like a bias, not a bias, but I guess there seems to be a difference, like females tend to be more intuitive than males.
Yeah, I think that across the board is probably true, that the attributes of intuition and the heart-centered emotions of compassion and kindness, gentleness,
Hmm.
flowing, going with the flow. I think those are pretty much considered feminine attributes, and not that men don't have the feminine attributes and women don't have the masculine, but I think that it does come easier for women to trust their heart or to trust their gut.
Would you say that going with the flow is something that happens when you're intensely enjoying what you're doing, or when you're just focused, or does it have to be both at the same time?
Yeah, going with the flow to me is connected to a higher consciousness, a higher intelligence, where we know we're part of this huge passion play that is life. So we're not separate and alone in this. We're all in it together, so to speak. And so when you come to that realization, you start to understand that there is a divine flow to things.
Hmm.
And if you're open to um, not being attached so much to the outcome of things, then it's easier to get into that slipstream of flow, and you start to
Right.
realize that life becomes it sort of becomes magical in a way, because you feel like things are happening.
So I guess the impediment would be the wanting to have control over how things are, and how not how things are, but also how you'd want them to be. So like the and maybe that's more of a male characteristic, that you want things to be a certain way, and you strive towards that, but you're not in a sense allowing, and that's what you're saying is blocking the intuition.
I think that there is a place for structure and goal setting and strategy and all of that. Left brain part of our humanity. I
Mhm.
think it's very much there's a place for it, but at the same time, I think we've become kind of weighted too heavily on that side of things. And I think especially here in the United States, where I am, I think that we've become really used to things being accessible and convenient and able to manage them. And I think that that puts us in a stressful kind of situation when we're thinking that we have control over everything. And when things don't go our way, then that's when people stress out and feel like things are happening. You know, they start feeling like life is happening to them, right, and not for them.
Right. I have a kind of personal experience with that. In life, a lot of times I don't actually. I have some expectations, but I've always found that my expectations were always crushed. So I try to have as little. I've learned through trial and error to have as little expectations as possible. But then I don't know. I've heard examples in sports. One of my favorite managers of football, well, soccer team, Manchester United, he always expected the best of his team and all that. So it seems to be maybe in some kind of performance, or maybe of sports and acting or something like that. Maybe you ought to set a high standard for yourself, because that way you're gonna work harder. Um, but maybe what we're talking about here, maybe intuition is a different domain. Maybe it works under different parameters, let's say, and you can't expect it to work as because it's not subject to your will. Would you agree with
Hmm.
that?
I think that we co-create with life. So it is our personal will, but it's also the fact that we're interplaying with everyone else who's injecting their personal will into what's happening as well. So there's a complexity to it in that way. What
Hmm.
you're speaking of is sports and competition and striving for types of work and so forth, where you're really needing to perfect something like a musical, like if you're a musician, or like you said, a professional athlete. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to be your best self, wanting to reach your highest potential. It's that part of getting too attached to what happens as a result of that that kind of trips us up. So you probably saw, and I know we spoke before about, I write about in my book and in my writings about the use of intention setting. And my thoughts about intention setting have kind of evolved over the years as well as I've played with it. And you know, intention setting is really being clear on what it is that you want to create in your life, or feel called or moved to create in your life.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's not wish fulfillment. It's not saying, oh, I'm going to intend to get um, a Lamborghini, and in 10 years I'm going to have it. It's a lot more complex than that, and it's um, a lot more of a co-creation and an interplay, because I really feel like the higher power, the creative power that created us, kind of has our best interest at heart and knows what it is that we truly need, and kind of conspires to bring it to us. But it's not always what we think we need.
Right. Right.
So, you know, because we kind of limit ourselves, or just get hung up on, like emotionally, like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And it may not even be the thing that's best for you.
So you're talking about like God's will versus your will, and ideally, if your will aligns with God's will, then things are gonna proceed smoothly. But um, if you're wanting to, let's say you're wanting to write a book, and maybe it's not aligned with God's will, and you try to write it, and everything just continues to fall apart because of that book. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I do think that, and I've seen this happen with myself and many of my clients, where they try to force a creative expression. They try to bring a book, for example, like you said, to fruition, to market more quickly than maybe is its rightful time for it to happen, either because the reading audience isn't ready for it, or because that person hasn't grown enough in themselves to
Hmm.
really give justice to the topic that they're writing about. So what I'm speaking about is like a lower motivation of like ego, like, oh, I want to be a published author. I'm going to get this book out by this time next year so that I have a publishing credit on my business card or on my website. You know, that's not the same kind of intention as I wish to express this message that's really important for humanity, and I'm going to give it fertile ground to ripen in until it's really fully grown and I can write it and share it, and therefore it'll have the best effect for those who read it. So those are like two totally different
Right.
types of types of manifestations, and they're both intentions, but they're very different in their outcome.
So one would be like more, I want to glorify me. I just wanted to write the book for the sake of writing. I want to, versus the other one is like, I want to bring some value to the world, something, whether it be a novel or a nonfiction book that's going to help people, basically. So basically you're saying the higher motivation, the higher the chance that the book is going to succeed, right?
Well, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with having personal goals. You know,
Sure.
at some point in my life, I had the goal that I wanted to publish. And so,
Yeah.
and I was very driven by that at the time. But I agree with you. I think that when we are able to kind of step outside of ourselves and look at not just our personal reason for being, like I know there's a lot of talk now. I don't know if there is in Europe where you are, but over here, there's a lot of talk about coaches working with your purpose. And a lot of people are kind of struggling to find their purpose. I think that what we're moving into as a humanity is more about our collective mission. So one is self-centric and the other is universe-centric. So I think if we're, again, tapping into that universal consciousness of what is happening that everybody can benefit from and not just you as a singular person, I think that you do, again, you know, it comes back to like quantum physics, you know, you're in the flow of the information field that's out there, and other things do tend to align with that because, again, like the time is right. Like if you look at what's happening in the world right now with COVID-19 and the racial tension and all the stuff that's going on right now, there's a certain collective experience that we're all having. And if you're using your intuition and tapping into what the collective is yearning for, and you have a message that supports that, of course it's going to be more, you know, successful, if you will, than if you're writing about something that is just for yourself. I hope that makes sense, that it's
right. Although it does remind, like, one of my favorite directors is Spielberg, and he always says, I'm always, and to paraphrase him, to do him justice, to paraphrase him, he says, I'm always mindful of the audience because I am the audience. It's almost like, but he has a good eye for what works and what doesn't work. Whereas in writing, especially if you're starting out, and if you're just writing for yourself, you might not have a good eye. What is good? Like you might read something and be like, "Oh, this is amazing," but other people are like, "Well, you know, I'm missing part of the story, or I don't know where this begins or ends," because for you it might make sense, but for other people it might be cryptic, so it might take a while to decipher. Especially if you use a very kind of cryptic writing style or whatever. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. Well, now what you're getting into is working with an editor or someone who can help reflect back to you what it is that you've created in your writing. I think that writing does tend to trip us up in the sense that we're putting on the page what's in our mind, what's in our psyche. And so we know what the story is, right? We can fill in those gaps with the memory or the thoughts that are in our individual consciousness, but that doesn't always translate to someone reading it for the first time. There might be some missing gaps or things that people don't, you know, that don't make sense. And that's why I think it's so important to work with an editor. And, you know, it's been said that 80% of good writing is good editing. So
Right.
that
So
part of the process is
you
important.
do you mean self-editing or editing as including in the editor, basically?
Both. I mean, the very famous writing coach, Julie Cameron, you've probably heard of her. She wrote The Artist's Way and other very no, it wasn't Julia Cameron. I'm sorry. It was, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget her name. I was just going to quote her because it's really funny. She says, it takes 10 first drafts to get to your shitty first draft, you know?
Wow. That's quite something. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
And I can picture her face and I can't think of her name, but it'll come to me.
Well, okay, what do you think of because one of the writers I really like, Thomas Sowell, he probably edits a lot of his stuff as well, but he said that when he put it to editors, for some reason, they changed the work in such a way that he didn't like. So what oftentimes happen is that he just leave it alone, and the editor would, in 6 months, they'd give him a gift of like a chess program because he loved chess or something like that to try to make him, smooth him into agreeing, to work with him. And that the Thomas Sowell will not budge. And then this process will go on for about another 6 months. It's still nothing. Another gift, and another 6 months, and then the publishing house would finally budge and basically print it almost with no editing because he didn't want it. Is that because he's so headstrong, or because his writing is pretty good, so he didn't like reading his books? I one time read 600-page book and I could only find one or two typos. So that's, if he was doing his own editing, that's pretty good. But that's not all editing is it? It's much more than that, right?
Absolutely. It's a big word because it is everything from the developmental part of the story or the work and how the subject is addressed, how
Yeah.
it is approached, through to, if it's a fiction work, it's developing characterization and plot points and storyline and dialogue. And, there's a lot to each one of those elements. And if it's nonfiction, it's, what is the premise and what is the promise and does the book fulfill that? So, a lot of times people will write their first draft and it's kind of linear, I would say, like
Yep.
they've gotten it down, but it needs height and depth to it, is how I would describe it. And so even before you start looking at syntax or grammar or anything like that, you have to really make sure that in the editing process, you're working with good material. So you want to make sure that it's the storyline or the, again, the book premise, if it's nonfiction, is enough, first of all, to be worthy of a book, because,
Right.
sometimes
Right.
what people are writing about is a good topic, but it's not, an 80,000 word commercial trade book.
Right, that's the problem, because a lot of people then write the book such a length because they think it should be that length, Or I remember Eric Crawford talking about the longshoreman philosopher, like long dead now, but he wrote some books that had very short ideas, but like short sentences, but they punched a lot of like ideas, and you have to digest it. And the editor came back to him and said, can you thicken the book a little bit? and Hoffer was just mad. He's like, this book contains so many original ideas, and these people, I don't think he said they don't know anything, but that was the sense of frustration I got from Hoffer. It was that that Hoffer rarely reads a book that has so many original ideas, and this book has, in each chapter has an original idea, and he was frustrated that the editor couldn't see past that, because the editor was just, it's his job to edit. So he's not looking at maybe the merits of the ideas. He's just looking at maybe the end product of how is this going to be readable, perhaps.
Yeah, so based on what you just said, I want to clarify too for your
Okay.
listeners that I'm referring to basically two different types of editors. There's independent editors, such as myself, and then there's the editors that work inside the publishing house.
Oh,
And when
okay.
you
Yeah.
get a book contract, you are assigned an editor, and you therefore work with that person to bring your manuscript to its final finished form before it's made into a book. So when you're working with someone like myself, um, the best thing that can happen for you as the writer is to find an editor who doesn't change your writing voice, that they actually get you, they get what you're going for with your material, and they help you enhance it. They don't change it so that it doesn't sound like you, you know?
Right.
Um,
Right. So
when
that's
you
the
work,
bad editor then that changes the way it sounds and the tone and everything. It just like they destroy a book.
they destroy your voice. Yeah, I mean, it might
Yeah.
become a different kind of book, but it's not what the author intended, and they're putting their name on it, so it should be what they intended. When you're working with an editor inside a publishing house, depending on which house it is and how big it is, if it's, you know, Penguin Books versus a small indie press, you will have a different experience. You'll probably you know, be a little bit at the behest of that editor.
Mm.
They'll have their own vision for what they feel the manuscript can become in its ultimate form. And you either will, you know, they'll either work with you to bring it to that, um, or in some cases they make a unilateral creative decision about what to do with that material, and you may end up not really liking what they've done with the material. I know clients of mine who've had that experience where they just didn't like how their book ended up. But that's part of what happens when you're entering a book contract with a publisher that is essentially buying the rights to the material. That's what
Right.
publishing, traditional publishing actually is selling your rights to the material. So they have carte blanche to do what they kind of want with it, which is why a lot of people self-publish nowadays, which is a whole other subject. Um,
Right. Right. Would you say that it's easier to well, is it easier to publish books nowadays? Because there's so many ways you can post it on Amazon and or any online ways that are not very inexpensive.
it's easier in the sense that there's no barrier to entry. You can access, I mean, if you can work with a Word file and a PDF and maybe InDesign or Illustrator to flow your text, and you can upload a file, then you can publish a book. But that's using the term very loosely, because not everything that is put in printed form with a cover is, you know, worthy of a mainstream reading audience. I mean, you know, you really have to um, give yourself a really good education in all aspects of what it means to be published and
Right.
being a book author in order to actually get any traction with your book once it's a book. And I see that happen too, where, you know, and it's cute. I mean, like, people get excited about, oh, my book's finally published, but they have no clue of what to do with it now that it's a book. And they don't know how to find their readers, and they don't know what it means to be a working author. And I feel sad for when that happens, because it's kind of like, I always equate it to like postpartum depression. Like, you have your baby, you deliver your
Mhm.
baby, and then like no one cares about it. No one's reading. And so you sink into like a depression of like, oh, all that work and nobody's enjoying it. So
Mm.
that's part of what I help people
Uh, um, um,
avoid.
going back to that word intuitionist, finally get it. Yes. Okay. So I had a guest on that was that said that she writes books based on that she finds that when she's that the book is flowing, that in that way it will be the same for the reader how to read. But if the book was laborious in some parts, then that would be also for the reader laborious to read. um, would that be generally true, or again, does it depend on editing?
Yes, I happen to agree with that statement. that it's not just the words on the page, it's what's happening between the words, behind the words, the entire energetic projection of the material.
Wow.
And so, yeah, absolutely. You can feel, and I can actually feel in a person's book draft when they first start working with me, I can feel where they were just trying to rush through the material and get it down. And I could feel in other places where they were immersed in the experience of the memory that they're writing about, or the passion of what they're writing about. And the energetic flow off the page and into my physical body, my sensory body, is a totally different experience. And you've probably had that happen where you read certain books and it's not necessarily just the words, it's kind of
Yeah.
like a visceral reaction to the
Yeah.
material.
Yeah. I remember one book specifically. I'm not gonna mention the name of the author, but oh my gosh, it felt like this person really wanted to publish this book, and I mean, it was well researched. It was all that, but reading it was just, oh my gosh, it was like it was worse than physical labor in the mind, I would say.
Yeah.
um, because yeah, going back to physical labor, I'm going back to, sorry, the peak experience of being in the zone. The only
Yeah.
time I really had peak experience, I remember, was I was doing something I wasn't enjoying that much, but I was working in London as a cleaner, as a dishwasher basically, and we had music playing, and I was doing like the same work for like 50 hours a week, and especially when it got really busy, because I was working in London in a like Baker Street Pizza Express, and the Brazilian music playing, and then really busy, and then I don't know, I just like I knew what to do, and it just like I would just flow like it was almost like I wasn't doing it, you know. So going back to writing, is that so when you're writing like that, then for the reader it must be an amazing experience because it just flows, right?
Yeah, that's a whole topic that we could talk for hours about. And that's the part that I really love to communicate to people, is that this is what's possible. Because you hear a lot about people saying, oh, writing is hard work, and oh my God, this is, you know, it's, I dread doing it. No, no, for me, writing is um, fun. It's a sacred act. It's a very creative, almost spiritual experience. It can be a very healing experience, and it's also transformational in the sense that it can take you outside of the mind to a place of greater freedom for yourself. And so I do actually coach um, writers, and have had different events where I'm sort of teaching how to do that, how to
Mhm.
kind of get out of your own way when you're writing, and and just let it flow. And a good place to start is journaling. If you're not a writer,
Right.
that's a good place to start, because you're really just doing kind of like a brain dump. And
Yeah.
then at some point along the way with the writing, it changes, and you find yourself starting to write something other than what you're complaining about. Like maybe it's a memory from when you were in 10th grade, or, your wedding day or something. Or you have an insight come to you that is like a creative idea for your job or your family. And,
Right.
and so, it's not just putting down and getting out material that's in your head. It's actually clearing that space to allow higher inspiration to come in. And that is what happens. And I've had many experiences where I read it and I go, did I write that? And that's been happening to me a lot more and more and more, because I feel like I am connected in with that higher realm of inspiration, the creative field, the creative force. Um,
Mm.
and I think this is what people refer to when, songwriters and people who have ideas for how to design a building, like an architect, where they really tap into something and they say, and I'm sure you've heard, you know, John Lennon from the Beatles and other people say, I just downloaded that song. Like it just came to me. I wrote that in 10 minutes.
Right. It's like a muse that comes, right? I've read this book, what was her name? Gilbert, The Magic of some, oh, I forget her, the author now,
Elizabeth
but
Gilbert.
yes,
Yeah.
Eat, Pray, Love, the author. And I read her book. Somebody gave me her book about writing, and it was interesting because she thought it was not exactly her talent per se, but the muse that comes. But I thought it was interesting because for the muse to come, you have to put in the work. It like the Hemingway quote about writing is bleeding on the keyboard or something like that is on typewriter. Sorry, it wasn't keyboard, typewriter, right? So it's like or the ideas in the art of the war of art is by basically you sit down every day and you punch in the clock and you do your 8 hours. So to get to that, and it's true also in my cleaning work, like most of the time it was not easy, but then when it was easy, it was very easy. So but to get to that point, it seems you have to go to some inertia and resistance, and is that I guess that's a necessary process, that's a necessary step to become a great writer. You need to go to overcome resistance every day almost, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is the Hemingway methodology, which is write hard and fast about what hurts. You know, like it's tied to pain and drinking and smoking, and you know that's very you know, bourgeois, right? It's very like 1920s Paris kind of bohemian attitude about writing. But then there's also the the side of writing that is, again, you know, I think it does tie into what we talked about earlier in terms of just not being attached to outcome. If you're just starting the process and not being attached to what it becomes, then it has, you know, like I said earlier, kind of like a fertile ground to grow in. But if you're kind of cutting yourself off at the knees at the very beginning and saying, "Oh God, I'm so angst-filled about writing this, and I don't know what it's going to be," then, you know, like we just said a minute ago, the material that you produce from that is not going to have that same vibration
Right.
as material that is produced from, you know, I'm just going to blow off today and go walk in the woods, and then an idea comes to you and it's really inspired because it's coming through the purity of your heart, and maybe it's also supported by the beauty of nature around you, which is itself a beautiful creation. But I also agree with what you say that, you know, inspiration has to find you working, right? Like what you can't just be out la 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 all the time. You do have to put your butt in the chair and in front of your laptop or whatever, iPad, and actually get some words down. And to
Yeah.
have a process around that is really good because it gets you in that groove.
Right. It's kind of like that Ben Franklin quote that God helps those that help themselves. But start if you it seems like writing is much like everything else. If you want to be a writer, write, and then and then you can get better. If you don't write, yeah, like you would probably agree that if you read about writing, but actually you're not writing at the same time, you can't really be a writer. You have to, if you want to be an actor, you need to get out there and start somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Matt, that's one of my mantras that I always say to people. It's very simple. It's almost funny. I say writers are people who write, and people just kind of like look at me. It's like, oh yeah, because it is very common, I would say, for people to get in touch with me and talk about their book project. I'm writing a book, and I say, okay, well, send me the draft, and they say, well, I haven't started yet. So, you know, you do have to put in that time actually writing. And I want to say too that even though my background is in before I became a full-time writer, I was in worked in corporate America and did the whole, PR, media, advertising, marketing, publicist kind of writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, annual reports and proposals and this kind of thing. So I was writing, but I wasn't really writing as a creative, creative writing. So what I want to say to your listeners is I didn't I did start into a master's program in creative writing, and I actually dropped out because I had gotten so busy actually working as a writer that I didn't really need the degree. It seemed kind of superfluous to me. So I quit, and I also had my children by then. So I didn't see a reason to do it. But what I want to say is that all the training in the world, it's useful, but what makes you a good writer is writing, just experimenting with it on a regular basis, and also reading good literature, reading material of people who are writing at the height of their ability,
Right.
because that's going to just kind of through osmosis, it's going to inspire your process.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth Gilbert talked about Charles Dickens as being the Holy Grail, and she would study his work like scripture. But that is, people always start with emulating somebody that's the best, like Spielberg emulating Frank Capra, whatnot, and then you perfect that. And speaking about movies, you also saw that you do script writing, and do you start script writing from scratch, or do you edit?
Yeah, I edit. So,
Okay.
people have a tendency to be verbose in that. And especially if they're coming from a book writing aspect, screenwriting is a lot tighter. And of course, there's a visual aspect to it. So you have to take that into consideration as well. So it's really a lot of honing in, a lot of cutting back, leaving things on the cutting room floor, so to speak, when
Yeah.
I'm editing someone's script.
I find that well, for playwriting, you can be a little more verbose, but for movies, there's no like instead of 10 lines of dialogue, two is best. You can be just like you can be this long Shakespearean monologues in the movie. It just doesn't work, and it'd be a boring movie. You have to consider the audience, right?
Yeah, and the thing that I think is challenging for beginning writers or script writers, screenwriters, is dialogue, because you have to come at that so natural, so authentic. And for some reason, there's a disconnect when the person is trying to write the dialogue. They're not actually writing it true to how it would be spoken. So I always encourage people to speak their dialogue
Yeah.
when they're writing it, so that they can actually hear what it sounds like.
I
And is that how you would really say that,
I dabbled in acting a little bit. Did acting courses in Edinburgh, Scotland, and it was helpful and actually joyful for me was because I'd write just like a few pages of dialogue, but for that it would really come alive when other people read it and they're like, and I don't know, I just find it hilarious and just like incredibly, like sometimes it comes to life and sometimes it's a lot better than you thought. um, I remember one time the best one I wrote was based on a true experience that I had that was horrible, and it just came out in writing so clearly, and I'm like, why can't my imagination just work kind of like that? Seems like personal experience is always seems to trump a lot of imagination, because you tend to leave out things that would happen in real life. You know what I mean? Like if you experienced it, there's certain details that you would get through experience that you don't get through imagination.
Oh
um
yeah.
so do you think it's a good idea for a lot of writers to well, I know it takes time for write, but you also need some kind of life experience, right? You need to kind of experience different things. So is that part of your philosophy as well, like encouraging writers to be more out there?
Yeah, you do have to have life happen to you in order to be a good writer. You know, all the experiences have to be happening to you so that you can kind of sift through them and see what the gems are that really want to shine and stand out. Um, yeah, I do think that it depends on if you're writing fiction or nonfiction. If you're writing fiction, it definitely helps to have a life experience as a template, at least for what you're writing about. For example, you know, and it can be something super simple, like, you know, maybe when you were a child, you were having a traumatic experience. You know, maybe your parent was, you know, doing something, you know, horrific to you, and you don't necessarily remember the thing they said, but you remember, you know, your toy sitting in the corner of the room and that it was looking at you and protecting you, you know, like that's those kind of details that are kind of off camera or uh, off plot that
Hmm.
really make for a rich, juicy experience of storytelling. So, you know, you don't have to necessarily recreate what happened to you in your past, but those memories can serve as a template for crafting the story that you're writing now in a way that you may not have been able to, like you said, just through your imagination.
Right,
You know,
right, right.
imagination is very, you know, gets a really good rap as being really, really powerful. But I think that in some ways our imagination is limited too. Um, and
You
that's
can't
why I
live in
always,
it. You can't live in it, unless you have really good imagination and spend hours and hours crafting. Then I think that that would be a discipline in itself to live in the imagination. I think that would, because most people, like you said, even the Harry Potter story came as a flash, like as an insight, not as a, oh, I'm gonna dwell on this. It just comes to you. It seems like to be a gift, almost like I don't know, a divine gift.
and that's Matt, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is that the imagination is still of the mind, and there's something greater even beyond that, and that's what you're
Okay.
referring to. You know, when J.K. Rowling, you know, said, "Oh, I just in a flash had the entire plot for Harry Potter," or whatever, you know, whatever she was writing at that time. I do believe, and I actually do call it a divine gift, because I think that that's what you're tapping into, is that, again, that creative life force that's out there.
Or maybe it could be destiny. Maybe she was prearranged to write the books, you see. I don't know. So,
Well, yeah, so let me just make a point on that
yes.
too, because we're talking about being in flow, but I also think that there is a certain required tenacity that you need as a writer. You know, if you want to become a published writer, you will, if you stick with it and continue to refine your craft and learn about the art of writing, the craft of writing, also the business of writing, and
Okay.
just keep at it.
But let me, I've used this Ramana Maharshi quote many other guests, and I'm always curious what they say. So there's a quote I'm paraphrasing here now that, if something's meant to happen, it will happen no matter what you do. And if something is not meant to happen, it will not happen no matter how hard you try to do it. And then Maharshi, of course, ends with, then the best course of action is to be silent. And that, but that's a Hindu mystic, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to disparage that, people from trying anything. I'm just saying there seems to be an element of faith in what people do. Some people try something for a little bit and succeed almost, you know and immediately in a year, and some people try for it for 20 years and it never goes anywhere.
I know. I've seen that happen, and I actually have thought really deeply about that. You know, what happens when your dream doesn't come true, right? Like, a lot of people talk about following your dreams, manifesting your dreams, but it is a reality as well, a potential reality, that your dream never does come true. And then what? You know, what are you left with?
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
heartbreak and divorce and bankruptcy. No, I'm kidding. um,
Yeah. That's an interesting quote. And again, that would be a whole other hour conversation that we could have. That's why I said earlier that I think it is a co-creation. It's what we want. It's what's on our heart to
Yeah.
do, not in our head necessarily, but on our heart, and following those passion points of things that really did excite you when you were a child. Like maybe you really like to, build things. And so, and maybe you're wanting to grow up and do something specific with that talent, but maybe it's not the thing that you think it is. Maybe you end up using those talents in a completely different way. So you may think, oh, the thing that I wanted to have happen never did happen, but it led to something else. So it's
Right,
that.
right.
It's also co-creating with God, as you said. It's our will and divine will
Yeah, now we're
focused
getting
together.
into the spiritual, metaphysical realm. Okay, being an intuitionist, I'm still using the word. As do you ever work with a client and you intuit that there's something off about this person and I will not work with them, or just like, or you intuit their motivation that about this book is just off, and you're like, nah, I will not work with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. When I first meet with an author, prospective author, I do have kind of a meet and greet, an in-depth meet and greet call with them, and um, I can not just hear what they're saying to me, but I can feel them, and I do get a sense of, by what they're sharing, what their goals are with the project, and also just how they present themselves to me, and even what they're not saying, just their,
Mm,
the impression that they give me that speaks very loudly of who they are. And I guess you could say that's their aura, or their, I guess you could say it's their aura. Um, so yeah, definitely have kind of taken the next step with people in one direction or another. One being, I don't think we're a right fit
yeah.
to, or, you really want this kind of editor. Like if you're really just wanting to sell 1 million copies of 7 steps to how to whatever, and you're really just wanting to do it so that you can say in your business that you're a best-selling author because you hacked the algorithms for 5 seconds on Amazon and got, shot up in that book category and got,
Right.
bestseller status, then I'm not interested. I'm not interested. Um,
Yeah, the motivation has to be something that's yeah, okay. So we're now approaching the spiritual realm of so you and I, before the interview, we talked about David Hawkins, which I was surprised because not a lot of people know him. So um yeah, I'm a big fan of David Hawkins. And how did you first discover David Hawkins?
Good question. How did I first discover him? I don't remember. I feel like it was many lifetimes ago that I discovered
Yeah.
him. And I ended up reading Power versus Force. I guess it was recommended to me. I don't really remember, but I've read every one of his 22 books or however many books that he's written, and devoured them. Like each one was a fine, 5-star meal, um, and really got so much out of it. Not just, again, the information, but the experience of, I think I had shared with you, he's one of the few authors that when I read his material, I could literally feel an elevation in my consciousness, in my level of consciousness. It
Yeah.
was like way beyond an aha moment. It was like, something happened
Yeah, he's
with
one of
me.
those people that's gonna be more well known as time goes on. It's one of those, and I feel very fortunate that I was at a few lectures. And so, did you ever get to attend his lectures?
Yeah, I've attended a couple of his lectures, and also through my work as a journalist, I interviewed him a number of times by
Wow.
phone.
Well, we interviewed him. Wow, this is amazing. You know, I have one regret when you mentioned that. I remember it was 2009 or 10, and I had this idea in my head. Maybe I should start like a podcast like this and interview him, because my sense was if I had taken that leap of courage, he probably would have said yes. Because the method that he used back in the day was just like on Susan here, just a muscle test. If it's in high, is good, yes or no. He wouldn't, he didn't care about the reputation or anything. He was just like, is it coming from a good place or not? And for those listeners who don't know, 200 is the level of courage. So below 200 is the levels of fear, uh, guilt, shame, and all the lower levels, anger. And above courage is neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, and love, and unconditional love. So he would just test if you're below or above, and that's easy enough. Um, yeah, but his work is so high that do you ever recommend his work to some people, and they're like they maybe not ready, or they just don't get it?
Yeah, he can be pretty heady, his material is it's kind of like A Course in Miracles or even the Holy Bible, material where you have to really read it over and over and over again to really understand the nuances of it, and to really understand the depth of the meaning and the symbology of it. So definitely, it's kind of funny because at the time when I first discovered him, I was married, and I was reading this stuff and having this incredible opening experience with it, and just mind-blowing. And
And
so
your
I,
husband
of
didn't.
course, yeah, of course I wanted my spouse to read it. So I'm like, read this stuff, just read a couple lines. And he was like, what does this even say? What is he talking about? Like, I don't, what is he even trying to say? So I think that you have to be at a level of readiness to really absorb that, because it isn't easy reading in the sense of, he has his own very distinct style, and a lot of his books are his transcribed lectures. So, it comes across a little bit uneven, in that way, but the actual teaching is there, and it's so profound. But yeah, you do have to be ready for it, I think.
Well, what do you mean when you said earlier, do you think it's petty, or you mean it's kind of it's hard to read? Because it's kind of, I find a lot of his books very sciencey. So it's like a lot of the references, and the style of writing is almost academic in a way. So it's like you have academic mind, and then the mystic trying to explain what what he's experiencing.
Yeah, so the word that I used was heady and not petty.
Oh,
Heady,
my
yeah,
bad,
like
my
heady
bad.
meaning like in your, it is very academic. It is not scientific, although he does. There is a kind of a slant towards that as well, because he was talking about quantum physics before many people even knew what that term was.
Right,
Um,
right.
so it's not like reading a nice little novel where you're going to follow the plot. His material is very much, you have to be ready to really want to understand what's happening to you in terms of your own personal evolution. And when I found his material, it was, I remember at one point actually crying reading one of the paragraphs, because I felt like finally someone understood me. They
Mm.
understood what I had been experiencing on an intuitive psychic level. And it was such a comfort to me to know that someone was further along on the path that could explain it to me in his writing. And that's what prompted me to reach out to him personally and want to start reporting on his work and sharing it, because I felt like what he was doing here was phenomenal, and that more people needed to know about it.
I want to reference your interviews after the interview, if you can. Yeah, definitely want
Yeah.
people to read them. And but that's an amazing. Did you actually interview him person to person, or was it through the phone?
Both.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
and I can send you some links to some of the articles because it was over a period of years that I knew him. He actually, I feel like he was a mentor to me personally, and and I gotta say, just so that readers know, or your listeners know, that he embodied what he wrote about so much because he was just this almost like a very, not, I don't want to say childlike in an immature sense, but because he's brilliant, but he had this very innocent quality about him, and he laughed a lot. Like he just, you could tell he just
Yeah.
was laughing at himself constantly. And at the end of the interview, he would always say, "I love you." And the way that he said it was not, it wasn't like, come on, or anything like that. It was, I felt it so deeply that, this is what he does. He is love embodied. He's very high on his own scale of consciousness because everything he does is in love and it's in service. And, and that's really what comes across when you meet him. I don't know. Did you have that experience when you went to his lecture? Did you get to meet him personally?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I shook his hand one time, and he looked at me. He had these very deep eyes. I can't begin to describe how it just looked unlike any other eyes I've seen in my lifetime. Like it was just, and this the radiant blue eyes, and such life in them. And he shook my hand and he said, "God bless you," in such a way that it was like very gentle, but also very firm. And then I went to sit down, and for some reason, I felt like my hand was kind of like charged energetically for like it was almost hurting for like 30 seconds or something. It was like, yeah, he seemed to be supercharged with spiritual energy.
Yeah.
Um, so being an intuitionist, see, I'm still using the word. Did you find that after you started to get into Hawkins' work, did your intuition become better?
Yes, because that period of time in my life, I was doing many other studies and teachings and apprenticing with people who were in the healing arts. And
Hmm.
all of that was serving to kind of break down my resistance, my walls of preconceived ideas of what life is. It was a very, my first round of spiritual awakening was almost like an existential crisis for me because I had to kind of throw away everything that I thought life was and reconstruct this new um, foundation. And so that was all happening around that same time. And
Hmm.
yes, my intuitive gifts were coming into sharper focus for sure. I was experiencing, clairvoyance, claircognizance, no prescience, like knowing about things before it happened, like, you know, world events, 9/11, things like that were happening to me. At the time, I didn't really um, I didn't put too much importance on it because I was still inside the experience of it. Like, what is this? Why is this? Um, but at the same time, it was kind of like um, there was an incentive in some way to continue on the path. I was really like yearning at that time for more and more of the experience of, all the metaphysical experiences.
Hmm.
I'm not so much in that place now, but at the time, I think that served me really well to just be kind of on fire with what is this and how can how can I go to the nth degree with it? And and I think that was the result of it is that I just, I always say like feels like the top of my head just like
Right.
blew open. And now I'm a lot more integrated with it, which is, I think, what happens with people who have a Kundalini experience or an awakening in that way. They eventually, it kind of levels out and becomes more
Right.
integrated.
I was gonna say, it sounds like you had a Kundalini experience, to say the least.
Yeah.
I want to wrap up with what you are doing for people, because I want to, if anybody wants to contact you for your writing. I remember you said that you're not writing if somebody doesn't have a project in mind. Somebody, if they want to contact you, they need to be already working on something. You can't just be like coming with nothing, in a sense, right?
Well, yes, I do some upfront creativity consulting if
Okay.
someone is incubating an idea and they need help brainstorming that. And again, I use my intuition. I don't just use my imagination and my mind and my experience. I also kind of tap into them intuitively, and it's almost like a reading that I give them, but not in a woo kind of way. It's more of just what I see the potential for the idea is. And they usually end up leaving that call like on fire to like explore more about their topic or what they're wanting to write. But yes, to your point, 98% of the people that come to me already have a project in mind and some writing done, and they need help having it ushered into the world. You know, they need a muse, as I call myself, or a guide or a mentor to take them through the process, the entire process of, you know, editing, finalizing it, deciding which publishing platform to use, and then helping them either obtain a book contract if they're wanting a traditional agreement with, you know, with their writing, or if they're wanting to self-publish, I walk them through that process. And then there's also hybrid too, which is a combination. And I do work with a number of publishers as well. So I'm very independent in that way. The person can come to me and I'm not going to try to funnel them down a specific avenue with their work. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
ask them a million questions about what their publishing goals are, how they feel about their topic. Is it something that's a life's work, or is it just, you know, a calling card for their business? And how do they see themselves being as an author once the material is published? All those questions get asked up front so that I can direct them um, on the right path to
Right.
meet their goal.
And you are author
Mm-hmm.
yourself, right?
Yeah, I've published 3 nonfiction books in the personal growth category, and I'm also a poet. So I do write woke poetry, or what I call poetry and prose for awakening, and that's on Instagram. So it's
Okay.
just Gina Mazza _poetry. You can find me there. Um, yeah, and I blog, and I am, as I said, a journalist writing for various publications throughout the country and in Europe as well. So, but it's mostly all around the topic of spirituality, metaphysics, mind, body, spirit, holistic
Right.
wellness, all of that.
So for movies, it's not horror movies that are contacted you. It's like movies that are dealing with some kind of spiritual, like Gaia theme, or some kind of studio like that. Is it?
Yeah. So, what was the question? You were asking if they.
Oh, so for movies, it's not horror
Oh,
movies
yes.
that are approaching you. It's like a different kind of movies, like more alternative kind of spiritually themed movies that you work on usually, not action movies or horror movies.
No
Not your
sci-fi,
cup
no
of
horror,
tea.
no kill them up, no shoot them up. Nope, I don't do any of that.
Okay,
It's not my specialty or my area of interest. So yeah, it's basically material that helps evolve humanity in a positive direction.
I love it. All right, the hour is up, so I want to thank you very much, Gina Mazza, an no, I messed it up again. Intuitive person. Let's just say that.
You could say
And
that.
consultant, and she's gonna help you with your writing. If you're stuck with writing blocks or anything like that, she's gonna help you. So thank you very much for being on the program, and thank you for watching or listening.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun.
Thank you.